Okay, this is part 5 of the Belle Epoch, the golden age of Europe, which really means the 1800s, especially from about 1872 to 1914, which sort of ended with World War I. Okay, we're going in sort of a general historical chronology with, now we're going to talk about the ancient Romans. And all of these paintings, there'll be a few exceptions, but almost all of these paintings will have been made in the 1800s during the Belle Epoch. Okay, so the first one we're starting out with Julius Caesar after he had conquered Gaul. And this is the leader of the Gauls, Vercingetorix. And he was a great man. He had formerly been in the Roman army, so he knew what they were like. He was brilliant, spoke a bunch of different languages, he's a great leader. But Julius Caesar is the greatest general of all time amongst the Romans, and they were a nation of generals. He was a genius and a badass, okay? And he defeated Gaul. Vercingetorix surrendered and was paraded in the streets of Rome, later was killed. Julius Caesar, some of his famous lines when he crossed the Rubicon heading back into Rome. The die is cast. What he said about Gaul, Vini Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. Okay, men are quick to believe that which they wish is true. Anyways, if you read about Julius Caesar, you'll be amazed at what a genius and a badass he was. And he was a harsh guy. Men were harsh in those times. But I still think it's good to read about them. His incredible aspiration of Julius Caesar. You know, like when he's 33 years old and he saw, the things that Alexander the Great had done. He cried that he couldn't have done as much as Alexander the Great. And he vowed that he was going to be the biggest man in Rome. So he's an impressive character. We don't have time to go into all the history. That's not what this video is about. But just to show you the magnificent painting. This one is by Lionel Royer, a French painter. Okay. All right, here is Julius Caesar with Cleopatra. And he had an affair with Cleopatra, the baby little Caesar. But then you know what happened to Julius Caesar. Okay. Julius Caesar, what I liked about Julius Caesar, yeah, I know he was a bit of a tyrant and all that stuff, but he still had respect for the Roman Republic. He wanted to keep Cicero alive. He was not going to kill Pompey. He wanted to maintain some semblance of the old republic, and more than just the triumvirate. So he had that in his blood and he had that in his heart. So I thought it was pretty sad when Cassius and Brutus, killed Julius Caesar. Remember the Ides of March. This painted by Vincenzo Camuccini. Okay, because that sent Rome down a new path. And, Dante himself, they felt that was the greatest disaster ever in the history of Rome, the death of Julius Caesar. Oh, here's just one painting from those days, the volcano that destroyed Pompeii by Karl Brjullov. And this is a rather magnificent painting, and it certainly reminds one of the fall of Troy, when Troy was burned down, when the Greeks burned down Troy after they'd gotten inside with the Trojan horse. It's a rather magnificent painting, isn't it? Okay, now here is Cicero, perhaps the greatest orator of all times, giving a speech in Rome. This painting from 1912. And you can learn, if you want to learn about oratory, you want to learn about rhetoric, you want to study Cicero. As a matter of fact, if you only study one person when you study the history of Rome, you want to just study Cicero, because everything, almost all of the most important stuff revolves around Cicero. And from a study of Cicero's biography, you can learn most of what you want to learn about Rome. Cicero connects you to the whole era of Julius Caesar. He connects you to the whole era of Augustus, to both the history of the Roman monarchy, the Roman Republic, and then the passage into the Roman Empire. It all revolves around Cicero. And if you want to read a series of books on him, the best series of books on him are the Robert Harris trilogy. Okay. You can also learn quite a bit about ancient Rome, of course, if Rufus Fear's course on famous Romans is the best history course on the Romans. You could probably watch a lot of those lectures on YouTube. Okay, I previously talked about Rufus Fear's and stuff. But anyway, Cicero is where it's at for studying Rome and for studying oratory and writing and a lot of good things. Okay, here's another painting of Cicero giving a speech in the Senate, and this is sort of the act of Catiline. Okay, there was the conspiracy of Catiline was a big deal. All right, but let me just share with you a couple quotes from Cicero. The Republic, as we inherit it, was like a beautiful painting whose colors were already fading with age. But our own time has not only neglected to freshen it by renewing the colors, but it has not even bothered to preserve its forms and outlines. What now is left of the ancient customs on which the Commonwealth of Rome was so firmly founded? They have been so utterly buried in oblivion that not only are they no longer practiced, but they are forgotten. Okay, so, I mean, that's exactly America right now. We had the greatest founding fathers of any country in the history of the world, and they were intensely Christian, over 98% of them, devoutly Christian. Okay, that was the foundation of it. Back in those days, there was no 503 tax exemption thing castrating all of the preachers and pastors. They were in full force speaking their opinions, and it made the country a much better, much more powerful place. Okay. A couple other quotes from Cicero, the Latin, res ipsa loquitur, the thing speaks for itself, the facts speak for themselves. Our minds have an insatiable desire to know the truth, sounds like Aristotle. Rhetoric is speech designed to persuade. Read at every weight, read at all hours, read with leisure, read as one goes in, read as one goes out. The task of the educated mind is simply put, read to lead. So he was a brilliant guy. He briefly went into exile due to some of the blowback from the Caligula conspiracy. And, during that time, he was translating books from, the ancient Greek into Latin. Okay, he did a lot of good things. He's the greatest of all Romans ever. He was the best one. You can learn so much from studying history. It's time well spent. But what you'll also learn, one thing too I'll say, what you'll also learn from studying Rome was not like ancient Greek. Ancient Greek was beautiful. There were some bad things in ancient Greek. There's always some bad things too, like what happened in Milos, okay? But the ancient Greeks were like this, like springtime in mankind. Before that, it was mostly winter and bleak and tyranny and brutal dictatorships. Okay, then along comes ancient Greek, free speech and free assembly and open debate and all these magnificent things, and theater, philosophy, sculpture, etc. Okay, with the Romans, though, no. The Romans were more totalitarian, more about power and control, and they were brutal. Okay, I'll show you some more paintings of them, but studying the ancient Romans, the reason you want to study ancient Rome, for many reasons, but one of them also is to see what happens with the emperors who no longer have any checks and balances, and just how brutal some of them were, because that's what you get in a world that's godless, which is unfortunately what USA looks like it maybe is heading into. It has been heading into, and hopefully again reverse directions. Here's a painting of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. So we talked about Julius Caesar having had an affair and a baby with Cleopatra, and now, she's such a fascinating woman. Now Mark Antony, a new leader for a while, falls in love with her too, and as a matter of fact, he's a bit, pee-whipped, and it contributes to his downfall. Okay, because there's a civil war, and he loses the civil war in part because of his relationship with Cleopatra. He didn't know how to handle it. Okay, here's a chariot race. And this, of course, reminds one of the great novel and movie Ben-Hur. But, they had a sense of spectacle, and they had a magnificent ability to build. They could build these magnificent coliseums. That's one thing where the Romans did advance culture. If you look at the School of Athens right behind me here, it's really Roman architecture with Greek philosophers and Greek scientists and Greek writers and whatnot. Okay. Okay, now here's some of the fans. This was a nice artist, Lawrence Alma Tadema. He painted a lot of nice paintings about everyday life in Rome. Okay. A day at the Colosseum. Okay, now here's a painting of one of the gladiator fights in ancient Rome. This one is called Thumbs Down by Jean-Léon Gérôme, 1872. And, Edith Hamilton, the great scholar of the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, said, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans were not the same, okay? The ancient Greeks, they loved to play, they loved to have competition, they started the Olympic Games. Ancient Roman gladiator fights, they were not play. At the end of the fight, the losing gladiator was routinely killed, okay? That's not a play. It was brutal. They did lots of brutal things that were cruel and evil, okay? And paganism is only one step away from atheism. And the emperors, insisted they be worshipped like gods, okay? So paganism, when you worship everything, you kind of worship nothing, okay? You just obey. And, all right, we'll show some more paintings here. All right, now here is Arminius. Arminius was one of the Germans, and he had been in the Roman army. And he had seen how the Romans kicked the crap out of one country after another and forced them to submit and surrender. And he developed tactics by which he could defeat Varus. and he defeated the leader of the Roman legions army, Varus, sort of an ambush in Teutoburg Forest, okay? And that was why the Germans had not been conquered by the Romans, because it was hard for anybody to stand up to the ancient Romans. They would divide and conquer. Okay, then later on, the Romans became more decadent. You know, one of the reasons is the aristocrats had lead pipes in their plumbing, and that was causing brain damage amongst the aristocrats. There were other problems. There was some generalized decadence. You know, they had a rule where the ruler was picked, you know, based on hereditary reasons, for example, rather than on meritocracy or a free vote or things like that. And Rome underwent a decline. So this painting is Romans in Their Decadence by Thomas Couture. One of the great movies is the movie Gladiator, okay? If you see that movie, you'll get a sense how Marcus Aurelius, you know, sort of was tricked. There was usurpation, let's say, in who became the new emperor with Commodus, okay? But anyways, nice painting here by Thomas Couture. Rome in Her Decadence. This painting kind of symbolizes the situation in modern America. You have the age of Augustus, the emperor of Rome, okay, up here, and then you have the birth of the Christ. This painting is by Jean-Léon Gérôme, and it sort of symbolizes, you know, which way is America going to go? Are we going to go into totalitarian dictatorship? That's where we were headed very recently, and perhaps still are, hopefully not. Or will we have, you know, what makes a country free? You need Christianity, Christian ethics, that the little guy matters. The reason why you want Christian ethics is because it says that the little guy matters. It is the friend of the little guy. It says all men are created equal. All men are equal in the eyes of God. And because man is created in the image of God, he's part divine, and therefore he's intrinsically valuable and has intrinsic rights. He should have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to free speech, and to own property. Okay? But imagine you are like the emperor, this, you know, billionaire. They don't want that for the little guy. They want the little guy basically to be owned by a farm animal by the ruler. That's how it is in almost all countries. And the default setting in the modern USA is either Christianity, Christian ethics. You don't have to be a Christian, but you have to have Christian ethics, those basic principles that the individual is valuable. Like Ayn Rand had said, if you grant individual rights, all other rights follow from them. You either have that or you have atheistic Darwinism. What atheistic Darwinism says is might is right. And might in the modern world is basically money, because money is the ability to force others to do something. So the person with the most money can force the most people to do their bidding, which means to impose their will. Okay? And once you go down that path, then essentially people are owned like farm animals. And people don't understand the significance of this. What it means is, here's what Nero would do. In the time of Nero, the emperors, let's say they wanted to have sex with a girl, okay? They would have her brought to their palace, or they could simply send out their soldiers and have them just kill the family and take the girl, and she would be the sex slave of the emperor, okay? The people had no rights, zero. And that's what I'm saying you have if you have an atheistic system. The ruler has unlimited power to do whatever they want. People don't understand that. But if you don't have man is created in the image of God, therefore has intrinsic rights, you have zero rights for the individual. You just have whatever the ruler grants at one moment, and they could take it back the next day. People don't understand that, but it's so fundamental. It's so obvious. You know, that's why they really should teach the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans in school, because if they did, people would know this. But the fact that they don't, you have all these people who consider themselves educated, but they're ignoramuses about history. They don't understand the most fundamental thing. It comes down to that. There is no way around it. Okay, now here is Nero's fire in 64 AD, where he intentionally burned down much of Rome, just like perhaps was done intentionally in places like Hawaii, and who knows in California, and who knows in some of these other places, as a way to free up land. So the powerful and the mighty, the rulers, could build whatever they wanted. Okay, don't you get it? And then people were annoyed, so Nero just blamed it on the Christians. How convenient. We can blame it on the weather. We can blame it on the weather change, you know what I mean? Oh well, how convenient that the weather change just burned down the area where we want to put a new building. Okay, here's Quo Vadis, and this was a magnificent novel written by a Polish author, you know, Henry Sienkiewicz, okay, in the late 1800s. It was made into a movie. There's Nero fiddling while Rome burned, Nero fiddling while Rome burned, and this was sort of a relationship between a Roman general Phoenicius, and Lydia was the barbarian princess. Okay. And the real contrast of this movie was, and of this novel, it's a magnificent novel, it's one of the top 5 novels of all time, was a contrast between the psychology and the behavior of the Romans versus the Christians. And the more you learn about the actual Christians, the more you will like them. Okay, the more you learn about Roman emperors like Nero, the less you will like them. There were a few good Roman emperors, okay, there certainly were, but there were plenty of real bad ones, and you see unchecked power at its worst, okay. All right, here is the Romans being sent to the Colosseum and fed to the lions. Some of them burned as torches. These are Christian martyrs. And they would sing, Christ vincit, Christ will conquer. They were at peace or going to their deaths, okay? And there was no money in it, okay? And this is before the Bible, so give me a break with Protestantism. Christianity was around a long time before the Bible was consolidated with Constantine, okay, for hundreds of years, all right? There's a long history of the Catholic religion before the Bible. Okay, that's an important point. And what they did, what people's deeds are, matters. It's not just faith alone. Okay, and this is by the French painter Jean-Léon Giraud. Okay, and now here's another painting just to give you a sense of what Nero was like. This one is called Nero's Torches. He would just have the Christians, tied up on top of a pole, and he would set the living Christians on fire and burn them as torches. Okay. And that's what happens when you have no respect for human life, when the ruler just owns them like a farm animal. Like if a farm animal owns, like let's say a dairy farm, he owns the cow. When the cow has a calf, the cow doesn't own its calf. That's owned by the farmer. He can go have it made into veal, okay? And it's the same thing if you have an atheistic Darwinism society. Parents don't own their children. They're owned by whoever the ruler is, and the ruler can do whatever they want with those children, whatever they want, And you get all kinds of other things that you don't want when you have atheism. All right, well, we'll leave it at that for now. I hope you found that helpful. That was sort of the section on ancient Romans. There's other better things coming up, but you just had to get through that section on ancient Romans. Hope that was of interest.